Welcome to the weekly update from the Lake Erie Regional Grape Program. My name is Kevin Martin. I'm here with Jennifer Phillips Russo again, and we thought we'd take some time since harvest is over to talk about what comes next. Sunny, beautiful day today, November 4th. I think you might see some snow or something, or at least some cold rain, but 65 degrees, and that's probably good news for our vineyards. What have you been seeing, Jen?
I've actually had the joy of being on grand jury duty, so I get to drive through the county looking at on my way to court. And I have to tell you, and I know I tell you guys to get out of your vehicles and get into your blocks and look at everything, but just driving from the road, a lot of mahogany wood out there. It looks really good driving by. It makes me smile, especially when the sun is shining. However, I have been in a couple of those vineyards on the way there, and granted, the ones I was in, we were looking at great berry moth pressure. Some of that wood looks a little bit spindly, and there were some areas that may not have had the rains when we needed them during the drought time. So I do need you to get out there and make your pruning plans based on your vines and what you have going on.
Yeah, and I would say, especially in New York, I think we're past the point of being able to maintain a casual relationship between pruning crews um, and the owner or vineyard manager. So I think you have some opportunities here. If you're going to stay in compliance with New York State labor law, you're also going to be able to at least try to communicate with your pruning crews about what your strategy is for pruning. Not necessarily saying it's economical to prune to a specific bud number anymore, whether that's 60 or 120 or 240. Nobody's going to stand around and count buds in this day and age. But trying to give them a good idea about what you're looking for cane length and set yourself up, whether you're using pruning as a risk management strategy or just trying to get a healthy crop, focused on, cleaning up disease pressure or something like that. Whatever your strategy is, there's going to be a couple of things I want to touch on in a minute that you have to get information from your pruning crews. So while you're doing that, you might as well manage your pruning style and your risk at the same time.
And just to throw it out there, because it is COVID and there are a lot of stresses that go along with that and ways to keep yourself safe, please keep in mind that New York State Ag and Markets has handed out free supplies of PPE. We do have some at the station. If you are in need of them, get in contact with Kim Knappenberger. She might be able to set up an appointment for you. Pick up some hand sanitizer or some masks.
Yeah, one thing you want to make sure that you do is some of the labor requirements are going to require not necessarily that you're unable to socially distance, but it's probably going to be more comfortable unless you get a day like today and you have some sort of unusual setup. Um, there's some required training that all of your employees are going to have to take. You're going to have to, teach them how to fill out I-9s as you do every year. So that kind of stuff you may need some of this PPE for. Obviously, we're in a good spot, being that vineyard rows are 9 feet wide and they're outside. So PPE use for pruning crews is typically fairly minimal if they're out actually doing pruning. But just keep in mind you might need some extra supplies to do some of that required training.
So don't we
Um,
have a really good program that's coming up in November?
Yeah, so you might be able to avoid this program altogether, the Labor Road Show, which is typically called a road show because a bunch of very talented instructors that help keep you in compliance from Cornell and other institutions across New York, to keep you in compliance in New York State labor law, go on the road and share their teachings with farmers. They usually do about 5 meetings across New York State. It's going to be virtual this year, so you can join via Zoom. They usually are at least an hour and a half to 2 hours away from Chautauqua County, Ripley, and you can join for $55 and attend all 5 of those sessions and get them recorded. Um, the roadshow, I would really recommend it for someone struggling to stay in compliance with New York State labor law. If you're struggling to keep up with all of the changes, or if you haven't heard of them at all and you're just not in compliance, you definitely want to attend. I do my best here. It is a lot to cover, especially, I can lean on the newsletter articles. If you guys can get through those, they can be a little tedious, but in 5-minute chunks, it really is complicated enough at this point that that's just not always enough. So I'd highly recommend this if you're trying to stay in compliance. The other opportunity you have, of course, is to just not have labor. If you can manage that. We have a couple farmers that
Do
do.
it all yourself.
I mean, Jen, I think you have some experience with at least observing some of the newer mechanical pruning devices and how they work with hand follow-up. I don't know if you want to touch on that as we talk about trying to avoid labor, but it's probably a good thing to touch on.
Just mechanical pruning in general?
Well, yeah, I think those are really your two options. You either need to get good at managing labor or you need to get good at avoiding labor use.
Yeah. Which I think is not a bad option. I mean, it works for us. We do it a lot at the research station. We have
Mhm.
our 30 acres there that we mechanically prune. Some of the vinifera we do hand, but we even mechanically prune some of that, leaving certain length of spurs. Oh, could you hear the dog? I apologize. That's one thing from working virtually.
That's okay. It's gonna happen.
It's going to happen, and I apologize. And people are just finishing up their school here at home, so they're getting very boisterous. So I will try to get through it without muting myself. So where were we? Mechanical pruning. And by the way, this was a really good year for. I'm going to kind of contradict what I said earlier. It was a lower crop that we had this year, a little lower than average, and it was kind of a little bit of a rest this year. So next year might be really good to kind of look at your pruning and decide what your goals are to set and what you want to leave up or not. And if you can afford the hand pruning or using mechanization.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I will say for mechanization is when mechanization first started and there wasn't any experience with hand follow-up, control over bud numbers was probably the biggest complaint. I think there was a feeling that you got much better control over your pruning strategy if you stuck with hand pruning, even if that hand pruning was migrant crew work. And I think one of the things that has really shifted is the perception, or maybe just the reality, that that's the case. I think if anything, you probably have better control over your bud numbers when you're mechanically pruning at this point, as long as you're doing some robust hand follow-up and you have people experienced and fast and efficient at hand follow-up.
And of course,
So,
that's going to change with what kind of wood you have out there. So you need to make sure
right,
you know what's out there.
absolutely. Um, but in terms of cost, I think if we look at benchmarking pruning costs and you stick with hand pruning, you're probably going to be at 40 to 45 cents in Pennsylvania, and I would say a minimum of 50 cents in New York. It's possible that we'll get under that. I mean, sometimes high unemployment rates do work in your favor as a grower, but I don't necessarily see that trend being the case because there has been just a significant reduction in that particular pool of labor that I would say, if anything, costs will continue to rise as they have for the last 10 consecutive years. So what that means is we continue to see higher pruning rates for piece rate pruning. We continue to see more hourly rates, and those hourly rates are getting higher. And then stacked on top of that in New York in particular is fringe benefits or compliance. So traditionally, fringe benefits for a grape grower in New York meant FICA tax and workers' comp and maybe unemployment insurance. And now we have a whole bunch of other things to stack on top of that that's going to take your base rate of 35 cents or 36 cents to 50, 51 cents.
Do you think that the Labor Roadshow that's coming up in this November, do you think that's going to kind of address those questions or at least give them a better handle
Yeah,
on?
it looks like they have almost an hour dedicated sort of to each new fringe benefit that's required. And I guess when I say new, that might be a little inaccurate. Some of this stuff started in 2019. So you're probably hopefully used to paying unemployment insurance by now. That's been around for a little bit. If you missed it, you are required to pay unemployment insurance now, so please start. But this stuff has these activities or this legislation has been fairly constant. This year and shortly, I think it was in April, COVID sick plans became a thing, so paid sick time, and that was for all employers in New York. It was actually a federal program, so this is for Pennsylvania as well. But that's just illness related to COVID. So that was sort of an emergency thing that's only good for 2020. If you didn't have anybody come into contact, we didn't really see a lot of COVID activity or concerns on farms. Maybe you never educated yourself about COVID sick leave, and maybe it didn't matter because it never happened so far. Hopefully, I hope that's what happened in most of our operations.
There's part of
So-
me that wants to talk about something, and there's part of me that says you should just not say anything.
So paid sick leave was required.
Well, it still is. We're still in 2020, right?
Right.
And
For-
our
for
numbers
2
in
more
our
months
county
is
and our
required.
region are rising.
Right. So it is required for anybody who is test positive for COVID. It's a little bit different because ag personnel are essential employees. So that paid sick leave benefit gets pretty broad in other circumstances where you're not an essential employee. It can be from a mandatory quarantine or childcare, things like that.
So Kevin,
So, yep.
Where does that money come from? Is that something that they've already been planning for throughout this year? Or is that something that they have to
So
plan
the
for when it happens?
farmers will pay that money to their employees, and then they will receive it back when they file their taxes.
Okay,
So that is a paid sick leave that won't actually cost the farmer anything other than it would have been a problem during harvest if your whole, team went down with COVID. I mean, the payment part of it might sting a little bit, but not having a workforce would sting more. We haven't seen that at all that I've heard of. So that's COVID sick, which inspired paid sick leave in New York State. So paid sick leave is now a mandatory benefit for all employers in New York State. It technically doesn't have to be paid if you're a small employer. Almost all of our ag employers are too large to qualify for that benefit.
Oh.
We're still waiting on regulations to define what small is. It's
I was
for
going to ask,
employees.
that's my next question.
Yeah, so it's for employees. We know that. The law says that. But the way the law reads, it could be interpreted to mean for individuals, regardless of how many hours they work. So almost every farmer has 4 employees at some point throughout a calendar year, even if those 4 employees only work 6 hours apiece. So you may find yourself very quickly subject to paid sick time. Even if it's not paid, I would say the benefit here or the challenge here is going to be the paperwork. So regardless of your size, you have to allow sick time to accrue. And how much is accrued is the same for everybody. And I believe it's 3% of the hours worked. So if they work 100 hours, they get 3 hours of sick time. Now, the amount that's accrued over time and stored from year to year can change as you go above 50 employees. And the difference between being paid and unpaid is that number, the 4 employee number. So sick time started accruing October 1st. The good news is there were no regulations when it started accruing. So the recommendation was to just start tracking it and not to let anyone use it. You don't have to allow employees to use the sick time until January 1st. And normally I would say, well, that seems kind of mean to the employee. You're going to offer this benefit anyway. If they get sick, you might want to let them use it. But we really don't know what they're entitled to and how that calculation is going to take place, especially with piece rate labor and harvest labor. We didn't have any regular sort of 9 to 5ers in October, November, December to really be concerned about. So I was more concerned about applying it incorrectly without regulations. So my recommendation was to just hold off and implement it January 1st, which is what New York State allows you to do. And hopefully by then we have some more information about how it works. So, for example, one of the open questions is if you get sick on a Saturday during harvest, what do you get paid for? Like, what, the Saturday before, maybe you worked 12 hours, and the one before that, you didn't work at all. So that's really an open question because we don't have regular hours. But what this means for a New York grower, if you have paid pruners, you need to make sure that you get their hourly information. I know some growers don't track that because they're paying piece rate. It's always been the law that you've had to track that. You either chose not to or you made up a number. But in this case, that number that you make up or you don't have is linked to a paid sick leave benefit. So you now need the real number. And you also need it to pay overtime. This will be the first year that pruners are eligible for overtime. So you need to make sure they stay under 60 hours or have documentation that they were under 60 hours. And you need to make sure they have a day of rest. And if you don't have a log of their hours, you don't have that information.
So let me ask you a quick question, that's a lot of information right there. And my brain was already,
Right. So
So-
go to the road show,
go to the road show. That's what I was gonna say.
first of all.
Also, would you highly recommend like a payroll service? Would they take care
Yeah,
of
there's
all
a
that?
news, I'm trying to think of when we wrote that newsletter up, but I believe it was in September or October.
I remember hearing.
And I mean, I don't really want to recommend one individual payroll service because I think everybody, when you outsource any sort of HR task or, hire a contractor or whatever you do, some people are going to not like the service that's provided. And I don't want to speak for those services. So what I will say is because of the computers, because of cloud-based software, the price of payroll services have come down a lot. The most expensive still continue to be the traditional payroll service that uses a courier, keeps all, track of all your books by hand kind of thing. They may even do the payroll for you. And those are going to be fairly expensive, and that might be something you need. But if you've specifically avoided that because you find it expensive, if you're willing to do the legwork, log into an online system, try to get your employees to do direct deposit or even mail checks to your house, you can probably at least cut that payment in half. So some of the online ones are probably going to cost most growers $15 a month or less.
Wow, that seems like a heck of a relief of a headache with
But
all of the different things going on. Unless,
right.
but
But
keep
it
in
does
mind,
it does introduce another headache because in that newsletter article, I think I listed maybe 50 payroll services.
Oh,
Um,
now I gotta choose.
because now that it's all math, anybody can offer a service like this. But one of the real benefits, like the way you justify paying for this, is almost everybody still paid an accountant to do filings for them.
Yeah.
And this offloads that expense. The accountant no longer does that. The payroll service does it for you because they already have the numbers, so they just use computers to fill out the form. It costs them nothing. So what you need to do is make sure you select one that uses a 943. So because you're in ag, you're filing a 943 rather than a 940 federally. And a lot of these payroll services have never set up their systems to do 943s. They only do 940s. So that's one thing you really want to make sure when you join, because you might go through a 2-hour long process of getting everything set up and setting up an account and then, starting to give them employee information. And then you realize they do 940s, not 943s, and you got to start over. So make sure you ask them if they do 943s. That will probably bump up the cost a little bit because it will eliminate some options.
another quick question, but they're never quick, so I have to stop saying that. If and when you choose to do it yourself, and you happen to make a mistake because you're not in compliance with one of the new rules, because maybe you didn't know about it, what could happen?
Well,
Like, are there fines? Are there?
all about the money. Yeah.
So
Yes.
it might behoove you to look into a service.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of times it's not just about like, okay, so unemployment insurance costs approximately 6%. Withholding FICA is 14% and they're paying for half of it. One of the things that will happen with some of these activities is your due date will change based on how large your payroll is. So if you're a giant employer that has millions of dollars in payroll, they expect you to pay the federal government like every day that you have payroll. They want it, within 24 hours because, well, what's the big deal? You obviously have a dedicated payroll staff if you're that large. Well, farmers that, you know, do custom harvesting and have a big pruning crew, even if you don't have a lot of acreage, you know, what if you have 10 acres and they prune all 10 acres in one day? What you may find is late fees associated with your due date changing because of the size of your payroll.
Hmm.
So quarterly becomes monthly or annually becomes quarterly. Those are the kinds of things you might see for certain benefits or certain taxes charged against payroll.
So
And
either
that's,
way, it's at lunchtime, hit the roadshow, hit the labor roadshow. and
yep,
get some-
hit the roadshow, consider a payroll service. And, you know, make sure you do hit the roadshow and consider a payroll service, not one or the other, because they're not necessarily going to know what farmers are required and not required of doing. A lot of times the software is going to try to charge you overtime on 40 hours, and you can say, well, I don't pay overtime, I'm a farmer. And they'll just shut that off for you. They don't care if you're not in compliant with overtime. But what you do need to understand is you need to pay overtime on anything over 60 hours. And you also need to pay overtime on that seventh day of work if it's their day of rest. And you know, you want to make sure that you give them a day of rest that's dedicated as often as you can. And you're just sort of stuck with that. So build that into the cost of doing business and try to, you know, make it work for you, whether that means you switch to mechanical pruning or you just pay overtime, or, you know, you change the structure of how you pay. That's sort of up to you. But one thing I would say is going to be a big cultural shift is you really need to keep track of hours by day now. You need to know what hours everybody worked on what day. And you don't have a shot at being compliant unless you know that.
Okay. Lots of good information. Thanks.
Yeah. Good luck. Well, I mean, I say that, but
So
everything
doom and
looks,
gloom of
everything
you.
in I mean, the positive here really is everything does look very nice outside right now in terms of we're set up for a good crop next year, and a good crop can take care of extra expenses. So, yep, absolutely. Yeah, I know it's a year away. There's a lot that can go wrong in the next year, so
Little
fingers
frost here
crossed
and
is probably
there.
a good idea too. Yeah, fingers crossed is a good idea too. Oh, and in case we don't mention it, because I've only got a few more weeks left before I take a
Oh
parental
yeah, some
leave.
of you might know.
We are only 20 days away from the crop insurance deadline. So if you want to change something, if you found yourself a little educated, hopefully by your neighbor, not by your own crop insurance needs, if your risk management strategy was lacking due to frost damage, that's totally understandable. We haven't had a frost in a long time, and those insurance premiums did go up. So I understand why that happens. But if you want to revisit it, it'll be by the 24th to do that.
Perfect. Thanks
So
for,
rather than crossing your fingers, you can just buy an insurance policy.
there you go. Which one is safer for you and your, anxiety?
It's up to you. Up to you. Thank you for
Right.
joining us. We will see you at least next week, and hopefully Jennifer keeps doing these things.
Y'all know he's leaving, right? He's leaving us in a little bit.
Temporarily. Thank you, everybody.
Bye now.